The rideshare dropped me at the curb at 6:42 inches the morning, and I knew something was wrong before my door even swung open. There was a moving truck idling in my driveway. Not my truck, not a truck I'd arranged, a rental, the kind you get when you need to move a life's worth of belongings in a hurry. Two men in gray shirts were carrying boxes out of my front door with the casual efficiency of people being paid by the hour. I'd been in Anchorage for 7 months, working trauma ICU at Providence, Alaska Medical Center. 7 months of double shifts, of watching people fight for their lives in the middle of a wilderness winter, of calling my mother every Sunday and pretending not to notice when she steered the conversation away from my house. I had my go bag on my shoulder and 72 hours worth of travel exhaustion running through my bones. I thought the strangest thing I'd deal with today was my own empty refrigerator. Then I saw her standing on my front porch. My mother had a coffee mug in her hand, the white one with the little blue flowers I'd bought at a flea market in Brentwood the summer I closed on this place. She was watching the movers work with the proprietary calm of a woman supervising her own home. Standing beside her was my older brother, his arms crossed over his chest, his chin tilted up at the angle he'd perfected sometime around age 16 and apparently never grew out of. Before I tell you what was written on the folder my mother was holding, and the single document inside it that was about to unravel everything she thought she'd built, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. I want to see how far this story reaches. I didn't rush. I didn't raise my voice. I'd spent 7 months in a unit where panic gets people killed, and I had promised myself a long time ago that I would never let my family see me fall apart again. Not after the last time. Not after what it cost me. My name is Claire. I'm 31 years old. I have a master's degree in nursing science and a professional reputation I built with 12-hour shifts and a lot of sleepless nights, and I own a duplex in a quiet neighborhood outside Nashville that I bought when I was 27 years old with the savings I'd been accumulating since my first per diem contract at 23. That duplex is not just property. It is the first stable thing I have ever had in my life, and I built it with the same hands that now gripped my bag strap as I walked up the cracked concrete path toward the two people who had decided, apparently, that it belonged to them. My mother looked up when she heard my footsteps and did not look surprised to see me. That was the first tell. A normal person, caught doing what she was doing, would have flinched, would have startled, would have at least had the decency to arrange their face into something resembling guilt. Instead, she took a slow sip of my coffee out of my mug and said, "You're earlier than we expected." "Flight was on time," I said. "What's in the truck?" "Your things," she said, the same way she used to tell me as a child that dinner was on the table. A statement of fact, nothing to discuss. The important ones. The rest we donated. I looked past her to the front door, where one of the movers was propping it open with his shoulder, carrying out the wooden shelving unit I'd installed in the spare bedroom myself. The one I'd sanded and stained over an entire weekend, the one with the little brass knobs I'd found at an estate sale. "You donated my things," I repeated. "Clutter," my brother said, shrugging. "This place needs to show well. You know how buyers are." "Show well," I said. "For buyers." My mother set down her mug on my porch railing. "Claire, we've been planning this for months. I sent you emails. You never respond to emails." She said it like the failure of communication was mine and mine alone. Like she had sent me reasonable messages about a reasonable plan and I had simply been negligent. "Your brother's restaurant went under. He needs a fresh start. We needed to act." I want you to understand something about my brother and the restaurant, because context matters here. He had borrowed $40,000 from my mother 4 years ago to open a barbecue place on the east side of town. My mother had borrowed that $40,000 from her home equity line. The restaurant had been undercapitalized from the start, badly managed, and closed after 14 months. The debt did not disappear with the business. My mother had been slowly drowning under it since. I had offered twice to help her restructure the payments. She had refused twice, telling me that my brother would take care of it, that I didn't understand the situation, that I needed to trust the family. The family had apparently decided to trust themselves to my equity instead. "How much did you list it for?" I asked. "We didn't list it," my mother said. "Private sale, cash offer, we didn't want to wait." "Cash offer," I said. "How much?" She hesitated. My brother looked at the moving truck. $340,000, she said finally. The house appraised at $410,000 8 months ago. I had renovated both units myself over 3 years, replaced the kitchen, retiled the bathrooms, refinished the original hardwood floors until they looked like something out of a design magazine. I had done almost all of it myself on days off between contracts, learning as I went, watching tutorial videos at midnight with paint in my hair. 340, I said, for a duplex that appraised at 410. Cash buyers don't pay appraised value, my brother said. Who's the buyer? My mother glanced at the front door. She's inside. Final walkthrough. And the papers? My mother held up the folder, signed last night. She's got her attorney on the phone right now, doing the wire confirmation. Should clear within the hour. There it was. The hour. They had timed this. They had timed my return against the wire window. And either they had miscalculated my flight, or they hadn't cared, because they looked at me now with the particular serenity of people who believe the game is already won. I should stop and tell you about the power of attorney, because it's the part that makes everything else make sense. 3 years ago, before my first long-haul contract out of state, my mother had asked me to sign one. General power of attorney, she'd said. Just in case something happened to me and she needed to manage my affairs. I was 28, and I trusted her and I signed it. And I thought nothing more about it until a nurse practitioner I worked with in Denver told me over lunch about her uncle who'd had his car sold out from under him while he was deployed, and the conversation turned to asset protection, and I went home that night and called a real estate attorney. That was 18 months ago. I had not told my mother what I did with that information. I walked up the porch steps slowly. My mother moved to block me slightly, which I ignored. I pushed the front door open and stepped inside. The woman standing in my kitchen was in her mid-40s, expensively dressed, the kind of person who handles transactions the way surgeons handle procedures, with a detachment that reads as confidence. She had the deed in one hand and her phone in the other. She looked at me with the assessing squint of someone who has dealt with difficult relatives before and considers them an occupational hazard. You must be the daughter, she said. I'm the owner, I said. Was the owner? She corrected pleasantly. She had the kind of voice that had been trained, consciously or not, to sound like a closing argument. The paperwork's been filed. The transfer is processing as we speak. She glanced back at her phone, checking something. Wire confirmation in about 40 minutes. I suggest you use the time to have a conversation with your family about where you'll be staying. I looked past her to my kitchen island, where my mother had spread the documents out. Signing sheets, transfer papers, a copy of the general power of attorney with my signature at the bottom. My brother had followed me inside and was standing near the back door, watching me with the particular expression of someone who has convinced himself that what he did was justifiable. She signed the POA herself, he said. Years ago. This is all legal. Mom did her research, he added, and I could hear the relief in it. The need to believe that they'd been careful enough, thorough enough, that there was no angle they'd missed. He looked comfortable. That was what got me. Not nervous. Comfortable. He had a new watch on his wrist, nothing as ostentatious as the Rolex from that story I'd heard secondhand, but new enough that I recognized it as something bought recently, bought with the confidence of incoming money. I looked at my mother. She was standing in the doorway now, arms crossed. The balance after the loan payoff goes to your brother, she said. He needs to clear the business debts and get a security deposit on a new place. There'll be some left over. We thought about giving you a portion, but Claire, you have income. You have a career. You're always moving. You don't need a house you never even live in. There it was. The line I'd been half expecting since I was old enough to earn my own money. You don't need it. You're doing fine. The family needs it more than you do. The logic of people who mistake your stability for surplus. I fixed every inch of this place, I said quietly. I tiled those floors on my hands and knees. I replumbed the second unit myself. I spent 400 hours of my own time making this worth what it's worth. And now it's helping your family, my mother said, as if that were simply the natural endpoint of that labor. I looked at the buyer. Her eyes were moving between me and my mother with a practiced neutrality. Before this wire clears, I said to her, I need you to look at one document. She checked her watch. Whatever it is, it doesn't change the signed transfer. It does, actually. I set my bag down on the kitchen island and opened the front pocket. It changes everything. I want to pause here and explain what I'm holding, because it is not dramatic for the sake of drama. It is the paperwork trail of a decision I made on a Tuesday evening in March, 18 months ago, sitting at a folding table in a furnished apartment in Denver, after a conversation with a colleague that probably saved everything I'd worked for. When I got home from that contract, I had called a real estate attorney. I told her about the POA, about my family, about the way money had always moved in our house, always toward my brother, always explained as temporary, always framed as help that I would never need because I was the capable one, the one who would be fine. She'd asked me one question. Do you want to make sure this never happens? I'd said yes. We'd set up a single-member LLC, the Clearwater Property Group, LLC, registered in Tennessee, with me as the sole member and manager. And then, 6 weeks before I left for Anchorage, I had transferred the deed to the duplex into that LLC. A general power of attorney grants someone the authority to act on behalf of an individual. It does not grant authority over assets held by a legal entity. My mother was not a member of Clearwater Property Group. She had no authority over its assets. She had no authority over my duplex. The signature on the transfer papers in that folder was not legally valid. The document I held up was a certified copy of the LLC operating agreement and the deed transfer, stamped and dated by the county registrar's office 6 weeks prior to my departure. I transferred this property into my single-member LLC before I left for Alaska, I said, holding it out to the buyer. My mother's power of attorney covers my personal accounts and medical decisions. It does not extend to assets owned by a separate legal entity. The signature she put on that deed is a forgery. Not legally, not technically, not arguably, it is a forgery. The buyer took the document. The kitchen went very quiet. I watched her eyes move across the page, the LLC registration number, the transfer date, the notary seal. I watched the particular stillness that comes over a person when they realize that the ground they were standing on was never solid. "This is dated 6 weeks before you left," she said. "Yes. And she gestured at my mother, signed as your agent, as my personal agent, not as agent for the LLC. Those are two different legal entities." "You," she said, turning to my mother, her voice dropping to something cold and careful, "told me you had full authority." My mother had gone still in the doorway. I watched the certainty drain from her face in stages, not all at once, but in layers, like paint peeling. "I do have full authority," she said, but her voice had changed. The confident flatness was gone. "I have a general power of attorney. It's right there. A general POA for you as a private individual," the buyer said. And now she was reading from my document, her jaw tightening. "Not for a registered LLC. These are two completely different legal instruments." She looked up. "The deed you signed over to me has no legal basis. The LLC never authorized this transfer, which means I just wired over $300,000 for a property you had no legal right to sell." My brother made a sound half word, half exhale. "Get the wire reversed," the buyer said, turning on my mother. "Right now. Call whoever you need to call and reverse it." My mother looked at me. And what I saw in her face was not guilt. It was not remorse. It was the stunned expression of a person who has spent so long believing their own story that the truth feels like an ambush. "Claire," she said, and her voice had changed again, softer now, the voice she used when she needed something. "This is the family's money. Your brother needs this. We can figure out the LLC paperwork. We can amend things. You can sign the LLC over." "The wire," the buyer said, louder. "Reverse it." "It's already processed," my mother said. "Processed to where?" My mother looked at my brother. My brother looked at the floor. "To his accounts," she said. "We split it to cover the business debts and the new deposit. You," the buyer said, her voice now with an edge like a blade, "have just committed wire fraud. You transferred funds across state lines using a forged instrument to purchase property you had no legal right to sell. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" She was already pulling up her phone. "My investors are going to want this explained, and then they're going to want a criminal attorney to explain it further." She dialed 911 while my mother stood in the doorway of my kitchen, in my house, holding the folder that she had assembled with such care and such certainty. And I watched everything she thought she had arranged come apart in the time it takes a person to read a single document. The call took less than 2 minutes. The buyer was precise and efficient. She gave the address, described the situation, named my mother and brother by name. She had the clipped fluency of someone who knew exactly what terms to use and exactly who needed to hear them. My mother turned to me then, and the look on her face was something I had never seen there before. Not anger, not manipulation, something more raw than that. Something that might have been the beginning of understanding, or might have just been fear wearing understanding's clothes. "You knew," she said. "You knew before you left. You knew, and you didn't say anything." "I protected myself," I said. "You set us up." Her voice cracked on the last word. "You sold my house," I said. "You packed my belongings into a truck and you donated things I spent years collecting. You had movers in my living room at 7 in the morning and you were standing on my porch drinking coffee out of my mug like this was already yours." I let that sit. "I signed the LLC over 6 weeks before I left. I didn't know you were going to do this. I just knew it was possible. And I'd rather have the paperwork and not need it." My brother stepped forward then, And I saw the shift in his expression, the pivot from stunned to tactical. He'd always been quick like that, quick to find an angle, quick to reframe. "You could still make this right," he said, and his voice was low, meant only for me. "We're family. Whatever that attorney tells you, you can walk it back. Sign the LLC transfer. Tell her it was a misunderstanding. My debts are real, Claire. The people I owe aren't patient." "That sounds like a you problem," I said. His eyes hardened. "I have texts," he said. "Texts between you and a contractor from last year. He did cash work on this property and you didn't report it. That's tax fraud." He held up his phone. "I haven't decided whether to forward them anywhere." I looked at him for a moment. "You're going to want to put the phone down," I said. "Think about what losing your nursing license would do to you." "I reported every payment," I said. "Every single one. I have receipts, I have bank records, I have the contractor's invoices and his W-9. You're holding texts about work that was fully documented and legally paid." I tilted my head slightly. "But the act of threatening to file a false report to coerce a property transfer? That's extortion. And you just said it in front of a licensed buyer who's currently on a recorded 911 call?" He looked at the buyer. The buyer had not lowered her phone. I raised my hand toward her. "He just threatened to file a false fraud report to force me to sign over property. I'd like that on the record." My brother set his phone down on the counter. There is a moment in surgical nursing, one that took me years to recognize and longer to trust, when you know the crisis has peaked, not resolved, peaked. The moment when the patient's vitals stop dropping and hold. The moment when the chaos stops, generating new chaos, and what's left is just the work of cleanup. That is what the next 20 minutes felt like. The officers arrived in 2 cars. They were professional and unhurried in the way that law enforcement is unhurried when the situation has already contained itself. The buyer met them on the porch and walked them through it. She had the documents. She had the timeline. She had 7 months of real estate experience navigating complicated deals, and she presented the situation with a clarity I might have admired under different circumstances. My mother was arrested for wire fraud and forgery of a property deed. My brother was taken in for attempted extortion and as a co-conspirator in the deed fraud, given that the funds had been transferred directly to his accounts. My mother did not cry when they put the handcuffs on her. She looked at me, and the thing I want to tell you, because I think it matters, is that I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel satisfied in the clean, simple way people feel satisfied in movies. I felt the way you feel at the end of a very long surgery when the patient is stable, relieved, exhausted, and already aware that the hard work of recovery is still ahead. She looked at me and she said, "I just wanted to help your brother." "I know," I said. "He's struggling, Claire." "I know that too." "Then how could you—" "Because it wasn't yours to give," I said, and it never was. The movers, who had been standing uncertainly near the truck for the past 15 minutes, were dismissed. One of them actually apologized to me as they pulled out of the driveway, which I found unexpectedly kind. The buyer's attorney arrived 40 minutes after the police. He was a compact man in a charcoal suit who asked me 4 questions and listened to the answers with the focused economy of someone billing by the minute. He confirmed that the wire transfer would be reversed through the fraud recovery process, that my LLC's ownership was unambiguous and fully documented, and that I would receive a written summary of next steps by end of business the following day. I walked him out to his car and then stood for a moment in my driveway, looking at my house. The front door was still open. Light was coming through from the back windows, the particular late-morning light that I'd loved since the first time I walked through with the realtor. The floors were scuffed in a few places from the movers. There were boxes stacked against one wall that contained my own belongings, packed without my knowledge or consent. The white mug with the blue flowers was still on the porch railing. I picked it up. It was empty, cold. I carried it inside. Over the next 2 weeks, I learned the specifics. My mother had contacted a real estate investor through a local landlord network 3 months after I left for Anchorage. She had presented the POA, described the property, and negotiated the price entirely over phone and email. She had signed the deed transfer documents at a notary using the general POA, and the buyer, under time pressure from her own investors, had not ordered a title search on the assumption that the POA covered it. The wire fraud charges carried a potential sentence of up to 20 years under federal statute, though first offenders with no prior record typically saw far less than that. My brother's extortion charge added complexity to his case. Their attorneys negotiated separately, and I was not consulted, because I was not a party to the criminal proceedings, only to the civil ones. 4 months after I came home, my mother pled guilty to a reduced charge of fraudulent misrepresentation in a real estate transaction. She received 3 years of probation. a substantial fine, and a mandatory financial education course. My brother's extortion charge was ultimately dropped in exchange for a guilty plea on the civil fraud conspiracy, which came with restitution obligations and community service. The buyer recovered her full wire transfer through the fraud reversal process, and last I heard, had successfully closed on an actual available property across town. My duplex remained exactly what it had always been, mine, registered to the Clearwater Property Group, LLC, with all documentation intact and 2 tenants who paid on time every month and had no idea any of this had happened. I repainted the front door. Not for any symbolic reason, the old paint was peeling and it needed it. I chose a deep green, the color I'd always meant to use but had been putting off. I did it on a Saturday morning with a podcast playing through my earbuds and a cup of coffee that I drank before it got cold. I have not spoken to my mother since the day she was arrested. Not because I'm performing a boundary, not because someone told me to cut contact, but because I sat with it for 2 months, and I could not find a version of our relationship that made sense anymore. I've spent 31 years being the stable one, the capable one, the one who would be fine. I spent 31 years watching stability being treated as a resource to extract from rather than a thing to be protected. I'm not angry. I'm just done. My brother sent me an email 6 weeks after his sentencing that was 300 words long and contained 1 sentence of apology and approximately 299 words of explanation for why things had gotten to that point. I read it twice. I did not respond. The spare bedroom in my unit, the one with the shelving I'd refinished, is now a proper office. I set it up the month after I got home. I bought a new desk and a proper chair, and I hung the framed commendation from Providence on the wall next to the window, next to a photograph of the Alaskan coastline that I'd taken from the hospital rooftop on my last night there. I work travel contracts still, but shorter ones now. 8 weeks, 12 weeks. I built enough equity in this place that I can be selective about where I go and when I come back. I set up a second LLC this year for the condo I'm looking at in Chattanooga. I don't tell this story because I want to be seen as someone who won. I tell it because when I was 23 and 25 and 28, no one told me that the greatest threat to everything you build is not the market, not bad tenants, not even bad luck. It's the assumption that the people who love you will protect what you protect. Sometimes they will. And sometimes they will stand on your porch with a coffee mug that isn't theirs, watching a moving truck empty your life, and call it helping. Protect yourself before you need to. File the paperwork before the crisis. Set up the LLC before your family decides your equity is a solution to their problems. And understand that I was just trying to help is not a legal defense, and it's not an emotional one either. The green door looks good. I should have painted it years ago. If you've ever had to protect yourself from the people who raised you, share this. Someone needs to hear it.